Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, child and elder abuse, it's difficult to think of two more important subjects. Guess what? That's the focus for this week's Newsmakers. Let's get to it.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, we're not going to do our typical politics, which I think most of our audience is accustomed to following. We're going to talk about, I think, two incredibly important subjects, child and elder abuse. They've been in the news lately. I have two great guests who are going to explore various aspects of it. Let's start with elder abuse. Katherine Pearson, she's a professor of law at Penn State Dickinson, not too far from where we're taping. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. I like the way you introduced that by saying politics is not the topic today.
Yeah, that's right. Well, we often do on this program a lot of politics and government, but right. I'll tell you what, I don't, you were a major player in a large elder law task force that was formed by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, obviously recognizing the ongoing problem. Here's my question. Is just more elder abuse getting reported? Has it been going on forever?
Well, that's a good question.
And I don't know that.
The big issue is we have more older adults.
Oh, that's a good point.
The population is aging, and Pennsylvania is one of the leaders in an older population. Yeah. So just from demographics alone, we can expect this increase in reporting. On the other hand, I think we are also more sensitized to the issues, and therefore people are taking the time to say, I think something's going on here, and therefore there is a need for a response.
Yeah, and there's, I think, a good bit more reporting as reporters and editors and others and folks like you who are more active and more involved in it, who are pushing, to get something done about it. All right, so the Supreme Court puts this task force together. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, what are the 3 or 4 big findings that our viewers would be interested in?
Well, I think there were 3 focuses for the report. First of all, this is the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying that for the state, the courts are going to take elder abuse seriously. The courts are going to take supervision of guardians and other people who work on behalf of older adults seriously. So the court is saying we're making a commitment to respond to the needs for guardians, to respond to supervision of guardians, and then outside of the guardianship system to also look at reports of elder abuse and to put those cases high on the docket so that they don't slip away before the person dies.
Yeah, okay, let's go through some of the aspects of this. I mean, what kind is there a specific kind of abuse? I noticed that the report dealt with things like guardianship, access to legal counsel. We can't get into all of those, okay. But just go through, again, for our viewers who are thinking about this, how do you, and we just recently talked about this with an expert on healthcare, whose primary focus is, what to do on the medical side, but there's many other aspects. Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to hope that we all work as a team on the medical side and on the legal side. I think probably first of all, one of the things we need to do is decide what do we mean by elder abuse. And really there are 3 different ways that we look at it. Physical elder abuse, emotional elder abuse, and financial elder abuse. Ironically, the highest number of reports actually don't involve any of those 3. They involve self-neglect. So about close to 50%, higher than 40% of all reports of suspected elder abuse are self-neglect cases.
Would this be like a senior citizen living alone and can't take care of himself or herself?
Yes,
is that
exactly.
It? They think they're like the folks I hang around with on a college. They think they're immortal, right? And they don't have to worry.
And it could be that there's a decline in judgment, that there's a decline in cognition, and it just gets a little bit overwhelming. Now, we recognize that elder self-neglect is a big issue. Most of the task force, of course, because it's a court-based task force, was looking at the broader question of legal issues. Sure. And legal issues don't usually involve self-neglect. Usually that's a question of resources, financial resources, social work resources in the community. Yeah. But about 13% of all of the reports involve financial abuse. And so that was a large part of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court task force.
All right, when we come back, I'm going to run to a break. I want to talk about the legal system, something you know a lot about. I mean, how serious are police, how serious are investigators in DA's offices around the state? Seems to me there's just more focus on this than I ever recall as a layperson. All right, we're talking with Professor Pearson. She's with the Dickinson, Penn State Dickinson Law School. I'll get that straight, or I'll get all these emails. We'll be back in a moment. If you want to.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Elder abuse is the topic. We're going to get to child abuse in a moment. Katherine Pearson, she's a professor of law at Penn State's Dickinson Law. And I think you had some a big decision you all made up up at Penn State.
About a year ago, we ended up making the decision that Dickinson Law and Carlisle would be separately operated from the law school at University Park. And it's been a good change for us.
It's working out well?
It's working well.
That's great. All right, back to the topic at hand. All right, one aspect of this, in addition to getting family members to recognize and dealing with the possible legal issues, is also law enforcement and the courts.
Well, and in fact, law enforcement was very active on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's task force. So that's exactly right. I think we've seen a sea change in the willingness of prosecutors to tackle tough issues of elder abuse, and particularly financial abuse. We used to joke that people went to business school if they liked to deal with dollars, and they went to law school if they only wanted to make money. Now you have to be able to deal with dollars on both sides of it if you're in law school particularly. And one of the things that we're seeing is prosecutors who are willing to use forensic accountants to tackle these issues of financial abuse.
Is the problem legally that it's complicated, it's expensive, it takes a lot of investigation into sensitive areas that maybe the legal system, and particularly police, with the violence that they have to deal with, it's just a tougher area because it's so personal?
Well, two things, I think.
And familial?
Yeah, I think two things really. On the one hand, we've seen a sea change over the years with respect to child abuse. We used to think of anything happening in the family was up to the family. And the same was true for a longer period of time with elder abuse. So now we're willing to look into those issues more closely.
As we have this discussion, we're going to put the hotline number up. This is the elder abuse hotline that folks should call. Now, tell me under what conditions they should call this number.
If they have any suspicion that somebody's being abused or neglected, they can call this. What the 1-800 number does is direct that call to the local area agency on aging, their protective service unit. They take the oral report and they go from there, we hope. One of the things this report came out with, though, and I think it's an important point, is we need to keep financial resources there so that investigations can actually go forward.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right, there's one other area that I want to get into. And this is not always easy to talk about. An elder person is the victim of abuse because someone wants to inherit.
Okay, very good. One of the things that is different about older adults and children when we're talking about abuse is that older adults are allowed to make bad decisions. As long as they have cognition, as long as they have the ability to make decisions that are rational from their perspective, we're going to allow them to make bad decisions. But when it becomes a person feels so trapped, so dependent on someone that they're allowing that person, or the person is simply taking their money, that's elder abuse. That's financial abuse.
I'm sure you can't quantify it. How could you quantify it? Is this widespread, do you think? I mean, you're the expert.
I think the vast majority of families and other people are taking care of older family members quite well. But the incidence of reported abuse is increasing. Just recently, we had a series of cases in Pennsylvania where home care workers were stealing jewelry from the older person and then selling it. So the opportunities are there, and what we now are willing to say is we're not going to let those opportunities flourish.
So in other words, we need to be very cognizant of, and I'll use the word exploitation because in a sense that's what's going on.
That's what it is.
People will exploit them. And you made a great point at the beginning. I mean, living longer now, if you reach 65, the estimates are that you're likely to make it to 85.
True.
Or you got a 50% plus chance, whatever it is, whatever that percentage is exactly, of making it to 85. Fourth oldest population in the state. So before I let you go, in summary, is there anything that you think, what would you tell our audience out there about dealing with their with seniors, with elders? What general advice would you give? Lawyer, we're getting free legal advice.
Okay, very good. Well, the one advice I give is practical. Start early, consider your options early, plan early, know what your options are before you get to the point where there is abuse. You can talk to an elder law attorney. There are attorneys who now specialize in knowing how to protect older adults, in knowing how to meet those needs, and who view the older person as their client.
Thanks for coming on. This is, I think, an important topic, and we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to deal with another important topic, child abuse. This is, I think, an important break from our customary discussions of government and politics. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania, and by the Pennsylvania Coal Alliance, representing companies involved in America's most affordable, reliable energy source. To learn more, visit pacoalalliance.com.
Well, joining me is Kathleen Palm. She's the founder of the Center for Children's Justice. Kathleen, thanks for coming back. All right, last year we had a state law. It set up new requirements for background checks and reporting. I want to go through this, but I got to ask you the same question I asked Professor Pearson. Is there more child abuse? Is it just getting reported more? Are we just now caring more? These are questions. Every day I read something in the newspaper about someone being some child a victim and somebody arrested, it seems, for child abuse. Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, I think there's more awareness, absolutely more awareness. And I think the media recognizes the critical role they play now. So we see more stories and reporting. I do think where we are seeing an uptick, not just in reports, but also in the number of children who are dying or nearly dying. Those numbers actually have been creeping up for years, even as substantiated child abuse was staying level. So,
why?
I think families are in greater crisis. We don't get into families quite as well. We don't support services as early as we should. You often will hear a district attorney who prosecutes a case where a child ingested cocaine or where a child was shaken to death. And they take some satisfaction from the prosecution, but they clearly always stop on the courthouse steps and say, this was preventable. We should have prevented this child's death.
But again, the same problem with elderly. It's in a family. It's often closed off to the public unless somebody is a victim of abuse in public where people can see, and it's often not seen.
Well, and the other added complication you have for children versus older adults is that a 3-month-old can't pack their bag and walk out the door. Or a 3-year-old can't speak up too well.
Yeah, good
so,
point.
That's...
Even
it's
even a
really
5-year-old
critical.
can't do much.
Yeah, it's very, very hard. And so you do have the added complication of if someone else isn't speaking up or intervening on that child's behalf, they're going to be stuck in a bad situation.
All right, one aspect of this, heading back to the implementation of the law, has to do with criminal background checks, through the state police. Who has to get them?
Well, we have widely expanded who needs them. It now applies to every volunteer. Lots of volunteers were already doing background checks, just not the ones the state is now requiring. So, if you're the Sunday school teacher, you need a background check. If you're a teacher, you need a background check. So we've expanded the population who needs them, and we now require that they be done every 36 months. It's about, if you need all 3 checks, one's a state police check, one's a child abuse history check, and one's an FBI check. If you need all 3, it's about $50.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But it's a $50 investment every 36 months or every 3 years. And many volunteers who have lived in Pennsylvania for 10 years only need 2 of the checks. So that's about $20 in that 3-year period of time.
All right, one additional question concerns, who and when the law changed, and you'll correct me, in terms of who is responsible for reporting. Do I got that right?
Absolutely, you have that right. We expanded that list as well. The lawmakers made it very clear as to who has to report now. Again, in that body of people are volunteers. So the Sunday school teacher, the Little League coach, who may have and likely did in the past make a report if they were concerned about a child, but now they have a legal obligation that's, could be punishable by some time in a court. If they didn't make that.
And that's becoming more widespread in that sense that people who are now required to report are being informed about it?
They are. They're being informed about it. The state has set up a website, www.keepkidssafepa. The challenge really is now, a lot of people will say, well, isn't it common sense? Because if you see a child who's being sexually assaulted or beaten,
right,
you're going to make the call. But child abuse is very subtle. Oftentimes it's bruises on a young child. Oftentimes it's the child who's now reclusive. So you really, in some ways, do need to train folks to understand. And it's a big responsibility. Like, I'm taking a step forward for a child, but what if I'm wrong? So everyone worries about what if they're wrong. So training is key.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about trends in child line. You receive a call, what's going on. We'll see if all of this is making a difference, and then we'll get into maybe what more needs to be done. We'll be back in a moment.
Great.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Business Council and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation.
Welcome back. I'm talking with Kathy Palm. She's the founder of the Center for, I have to get this right, Center for Children's Justice. I want to say Justice for Children, but it's the same thing, right? Same
absolutely.
thing. All right. We've been talking about what's required now for all kinds of folks who are working with children and the legal situation that could prevail. But what's the impact on the schools when you have young kids who are abused, let's say, at home, and then they come into the schools? And that's an A. And we'll go ahead.
Well, it's a great question, and it's great insight, because I think Pennsylvania is ripe for a very big conversation about school funding. And one of the things we would really encourage people to look at is, what does the child bring inside that door when they come in? I mean, part of it is that a lot of folks want to talk about reading, writing, and arithmetic, but our kids are bringing so much in that this teacher has to be the counselor and the child who doesn't come in with care. We are seeing that traumatized kids, it lasts and throughout their lifetime. It affects their school readiness, their school wellness. So we really can't disconnect the dots, that what happens inside the school setting is very much influenced by what's happening inside that child's community and home.
Yeah, that's something we don't often think about, that the abuse may occur in the home, but it extends to so many aspects of a young child's life that not just as traumatizing for the kid, but also has social consequences with monetary, fiscal, however you want to put it, effects, right?
And healthcare. There's a Penn State researcher who's been funded by the National Institutes of Health for decades that she's been tracking the same pool of women who were victimized, sexually assaulted as young people. The rates of obesity, the rates of diabetes, psychological. We really, if we want to bend the cost of school costs and we want to bend the costs on healthcare, we really need to figure out how to prevent child abuse in the first place.
All right, there's a child line hotline, right?
Right.
I got that child line health line. Let's talk about the calls that go into that.
So there's the 1-800-932-0313. If someone has a reasonable cause to suspect that a child's being abused, they call that hotline. They can also do it online. But, for now, people are still using the hotline pretty much as well. But what happens is there's a specially trained person there, and they listen and hear what the person has to say, and then they feed it out from there. So it either goes to law enforcement because it's a crime against a child, or it goes to children and youth for an investigation. And oftentimes it's not that it is about child abuse, but it's clear that the family or the child needs some level of support. And so someone's going to go out and assess the family and work with them to see if there's some services that need to prevent child abuse.
Are these calls anonymous?
The calls can be anonymous, but those mandated reporters we talked about earlier, they have to call there. And
I get it. So if you're in that list, then you need to call that hotline number. Okay.
And the key there right now is that we are seeing an extraordinary burden on the child line. You can look at it as a burden in terms of the number of calls that are coming in.
I know what you mean.
But so one of the things that has been good so far in the transition to Governor Wolf's administration is we were not prepared for this. We didn't do enough planning, and so we asked lots more people to report, and lots more people are taking their jobs seriously to report, and the hotline got overwhelmed and crashed. And we should have thought about that proactively and put more staff on the ground, but we didn't. But it was pretty quick when Governor Wolf came in, and they have increased the staff at Childline both to process the background checks and to answer the calls. The key now will be whether that attention and those resources stay in place.
All right. In the wake of the horrific, Jerry Sandusky scandal, child abuse, obviously, victims, regardless of their age, let's put it that way. There's a fund at Penn State. What's that about?
So, Penn State has agreed to put $60 million into prevention and research about child abuse. It's fantastic. It is one of the silver linings, and there are small.
And here, Senator Jay Corman.
Right, and Senator Corman really helped make sure it stayed in Pennsylvania. So Penn State will keep a share of it, about $12 million, to further their own really good research around child abuse, and $48 million will go to the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency to get us to where we didn't get with this initial set of laws, which was about prevention. Because we all could have better investigations, we could all have services that are available to kids once they're abused, but you and I, both as parents and grandparents, absolutely want that kid to not experience that abuse in the first place. So some of that $48 million will go into communities that are doing really good things and figuring out a way to prevent child abuse. So that's one of, again, you don't want to say there was a silver lining in the Sandusky case, but there was clearly just a tiny positive that grew out of that.
I get it, and I think most of us were delighted that that money, remained in this state. Well, all right. Well, I think this is your second appearance. This is an important topic. You'll come back, I hope, and bring us some updates. All right. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.